God moved. The Spirit came into activity. In this light came creation of that which in the earth came to be matter. Each soul enters each experience for a lesson, a development. The entity was in the land that has been called the Atlantean, during those periods when there was the breaking up of the land. What we think and what we eat, combined together, make us what we are, physically and mentally. Meditation is listening to the divine within. Dreams are that the entity may gain the more perfect understanding and knowledge of those forces that go to make up the real existence. The earth will be broken up in many places. The early portion will see a change in the physical aspect of the west coast of America. These are the words of a man who is considered the most gifted psychic of our time. He was called a man of miracles, a mystery man, and the sleeping prophet. His work has deeply touched the lives of millions throughout the world. His name was Edgar Cayce. Dozens of books have been written about Edgar Cayce, not just because he was psychic, but because while in trance he seemed to tap a universal mind that could peer into every troubled cell of the human body and could roam through time to see past lives and future events. This wisdom was so in the mainstream of all the great spiritual teachers that today, more than 30 years after his death, growing numbers are studying the words of this extraordinary and yet very simple man. As a young boy on a farm in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, where he was born on March 18, 1877, Edgar Cayce began to exhibit some unusual talents. At the age of 6 or 7, he told his parents that he could see and talk to his grandfather, who was dead. He also told them about glowing energy patterns that he could see around living things. When he was 13, he developed the ability to sleep on his school books after studying the lessons and retain a photographic memory of their entire contents. Then, at 21, his career as a salesman was cut short by an illness that caused a paralysis of his throat muscles, leaving him unable to speak above a low whisper. The local doctors could not find a physical cause for the condition, and all attempts to cure him failed. As a last resort, hypnosis was tried. Although he spoke in a clear voice once hypnotized, he couldn't be awakened from the hypnotic state, nor would he take a post-hypnotic suggestion. When he finally returned to consciousness, he told Al Lane, who was working with him, that he'd felt like this as a child when he learned his lessons by sleeping on his books. Al Lane let Edgar put himself to sleep and then spoke to him, and Edgar spoke back, giving a detailed diagnosis of his physical condition and suggestions for treatment. These were followed, and Edgar got well. Soon, various doctors in the area were bringing their most difficult cases to Edgar. It was discovered that Edgar only needed the names and addresses of patients in order to diagnose their physical conditions. One of the doctors who became very interested was Dr. Wesley Ketchum.
You just didn't know where he was going to hit you. He'd get up the darndest things. I tinkered with him in well cases, bad cases, mediocre, and all kinds. Well, some of the things What he did was so uncanny that you could scarcely believe. He diagnosed it better than I could or anybody else.
Dr. Ketchum wrote a paper about his work with Edgar Cayce for a clinical research society in Boston. This story was picked up by the New York Times. And on October 9th, 1910, they published a full-page article. And soon, newspapers across the country were featuring stories about the farmer boy who became a doctor when asleep. Until 1923, Cayce supported himself as a professional photographer, giving readings only in his spare time. But the requests for readings were becoming so numerous that he was persuaded to employ a full-time secretary. Gladys Davis was hired, and from that point on began in great detail and very carefully to record everything that Edgar Cayce said from the unconscious state.
I felt an instant attraction to this man. He seemed so, well, I just trusted him, and I didn't think anything about his readings. When I sat there and listened to it, it was just like any other job of taking dictation. One day during a reading, he said a string of words, so I was wondering whether I should put a dash or comma or just how to word this. And over there asleep on the couch, his eyes closed, he said, put a comma between these. and a few times he did that, and other people learned that it was good to be present for the reading, because if they thought of questions, he would answer them without being asked.
Edgar Cayce would not only prescribe treatments for patients, he would occasionally recommend certain doctors for them to go to, although he consciously had no knowledge of these doctors. One of the outstanding personalities of this kind was Harold J. Riley.
The important fact is that these readings were so erudite, and the more I went into them, the more I realized the basic philosophy of the readings were the things that I myself had learned in the different disciplines that I had studied.
For all healing comes from the one source. And whether there is the application of foods, exercise, medicine, or even the knife, it is to bring to the consciousness of the forces within the body that aid in reproducing themselves, which is the awareness of creative forces, of God forces.
Usually it was a combination of therapies, all of which worked into what I used afterwards as a word called CARE, C-A-R-E, and that stands for circulation, assimilation, relaxation, and elimination. And believe me, when you get those things going in the body doesn't have too much chance to become a good culture medium for a germ.
When any food value enters the stomach, it immediately becomes a storehouse or medicine chest that may create all the elements necessary for proper digestion within the system.
I don't think there's anything in any field of healing that can surpass the instructions that Cayce gave, because he didn't give them the cure symptoms. He gave them the cure, the basis of the illness.
3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
So the basic concepts of the Cayce readings is that the basis of health is spiritual, mental, and physical.
1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 2, 3, 4. 3.
To be sure, attitudes oft influence the physical conditions of the body. No one can hate his neighbor and not have upset digestion or heart disorder. In January 1937, Edgar Cayce received a letter from an 18-year-old girl in Kentucky asking for a physical reading. Her mother recalls the diagnosis by a specialist from Nashville, a diagnosis that was later confirmed by Cayce while asleep.
He called it scleroderma. Well, we'd never heard of scleroderma, and he explained to us that it was a hardening of the tissues of the body. And he said that it would be a very slow, painful death.
After I overheard a conversation that the doctors were talking to my father and mother that I wouldn't get well, I decided to get a reading from Mr. Cayce. The reading was given in January, and the readings were followed to the letter. And I went to the Mayo Clinic in June of 1937. I wrote Mr. Cayce to tell him that I was going. And 7 dermatologists examined me, and I only had enough of the trouble from the hips to the knees for them to even know what I had had. They did not know anything more to do. They had never heard of the treatment, but they said just to continue what I was doing.
More than 8,000 persons came for help. In those cases where the readings were followed, the patients were cured. Although Cayce's advice was unique for each individual, there are many doctors who are studying and working with his medical prescriptions and finding them applicable today. 2 such doctors are William and Gladys McGarry.
We've had lots of interesting experiences with patients that have come to us because of the Edgar Cayce material, and we've done research with a variety of different conditions such as arthritis and scleroderma. One of the most interesting cases, I think, was a scleroderma case that presented itself to us back in 1968, really, before the clinic really got started. She was treated according to the concepts in the Cayce readings dealing with scleroderma. We adapted these ideas to the treatment of scleroderma in her case and used things such as the wet cell battery and massage and manipulation and diet and ways of thinking about things that are inherent in the Cayce material. Within a period of several months, she was able to swallow normally again, and her hands had changed, and she had improved so much we presented her to the medical symposium.
The philosophy that we work with at the ARE clinic is based primarily on the material that comes from the Edgar Cayce readings. And basic thrust of it is bringing together the whole person. We feel like the important thing in working with a person is not working with the disease the person has, but working with the person themselves. We call this holistic medicine. It deals with the body, mind, and spirit. One of the quotes from the readings is that the spirit is the life, the mind is the builder, and the physical is the result. With this as the undergirding for our work, we try to approach the patients as people who are approaching each one of their illnesses or their difficulties as opportunities.
The flash burns were so severe that the doctors felt that the eyes could not be saved without taking one of them out. Our family physician told me this, and it was then that I asked Edgar Cayce, my father, to give a reading. When the treatments he recommended were applied, in applications on the eyes, internal medicine, and a change of diet, the eyes began to heal. And in a matter of weeks, they removed the bandages, and I could see. My father was an unusually creative person. He was a fine photographer and was noted for his pictures, especially those of children. Edgar Cayce was an inventor of games. He loved to play all kinds of games and invented one called Pit, which is still on the market. He was a fine bowler. I never won a bowling game from him. He was a lousy golfer, but he loved to play. He was a great fisherman and fished everywhere that he had an opportunity. He was a man who loved to cook and did all kinds of things with preserves and berries of various kinds. He was a great gardener and loved to have exotic trees of all kinds around him. He was a man who was a fine Sunday school teacher, and he always had the largest classes in any church that he worked in. He also had Sunday school classes in prisons, wherever he happened to be.
He looked like a country doctor, a simple person, You wouldn't turn around the street if you saw him. But once you spoke to him, his voice was soft, it was direct, it was honest, it was embracing. And for me, I always saw a double pupil, a superimposure, as if he were looking through eternity. It made you a little uncomfortable at times because you wondered what you had done yesterday or said yesterday that you ought not to have said. And yet, after you got to know him, you knew that he wasn't anyone who ever condemned. If he ever told you anything about a negative side of your nature, he would do it in such a way that you considered it a blessing. Now, you know, not even your husband or wife could do that.
It was an interesting experience to be in this home with Edgar Cayce and Mrs. Cayce. She is seldom mentioned, and she was so much a part of this whole scene. Her lovely, quiet manner, her strength. She had fantastic strength. She followed the readings where diet was concerned for her family. She was a marvelous balance for Edgar Cayce, who was so given to going to extremes.
In 1923, Arthur Lammers, a printer from Ohio, requested a different kind of reading from Cayce. He asked for an astrological chart. The sleeping Cayce gave a horoscope in brief. And then, near the end of the reading, came the curious sentence, "He was once a monk." As always, when Cayce awoke, he recalled nothing of what he had said while in trance. Being a devout Christian, this reference to reincarnation was disturbing to him. He searched the Bible and came to accept reincarnation as an aid to personal growth. A psychotherapist who knew Cayce then, Dr. Harmon Brough.
When I was a young graduate student at the University of Chicago Divinity School, I heard about Cayce and went and spent a good part of a year listening to his readings, hundreds of them, and making notes which later I put into my doctoral thesis about him at the University of Chicago and used in my graduate study at Harvard, too. We talked about reincarnation, of course, and began to develop a picture that, to me, made a model of a life journey which avoided the pitfalls that are often associated with the concept of reincarnation. It avoided fatalism. It avoided a kind of self-centered perfectionism of soul development, and avoided that detachment from other people and their karma that sometimes has marked the misuse of reincarnation. Instead, this was a view of responding to the divine initiative, reaching out to the individual to help the person to develop talents and interests and values that would make a possibility for creative service of other people. And that was the biblical core that Edgar Cayce responded to, and built a picture of people working in covenants and growing together in the life of faith that also answered to the biblical account that Edgar Cayce cared about and understood, with the result that people in Christian and Jewish life both have looked thoughtfully at this and not wanted to be caught turning away from it as unscientific, as has happened in the church's life when it is said that Galileo was wrong or Darwin or Freud, rather saying, if this is true, then let's grapple with it and see how we can keep it within the perspectives of a rich life of faith.
Then, as there has been and is the passage of a soul through time and space, through this and that experience, it has been and is for the purpose of giving more and more opportunities to express that which justifies man in his relationships one with another, in mercy, love, patience, long-suffering, brotherly love. Reincarnation is a difficult concept for many people to accept.
All that we are, everything that we have because we have attracted it to ourselves by our thoughts and acts in this life and past lives. It's the law of our moral and spiritual being, the law of karma.
For each soul, each entity constantly meets self. And if each soul would but understand those hardships which are accredited much to others are caused most by self, know that in those you are meeting thyself.
The Cayce medical material was exciting, but the life readings were psychologically very sharp. They offered people themes they could work with in their lives for their growth, for their talents, for their vocations, for their relationships.
Know that it is not all just to live, not all just to be good, but good for something, that ye may fulfill that purpose for which ye have entered this experience. And that purpose is that you might know yourself, to be yourself, and yet one with the creative forces, or God. Edgar Cayce's second son, Edgar Evans, became interested in one of the most controversial areas of the life readings.
For a number of years, I had listened to my father, Edgar Cayce, give readings. And a lot of these readings mentioned Atlantis. And the story that came out of it really worse than Plato's, because it mentioned not one destruction, but three, and the last one about 10,000 BC, which I think is the one that Plato referred to.
Those were the periods in which there was the application of much that is being discovered or rediscovered today. The periods when a great deal of thought was given as to conveniences of every nature.
I think the significance of this, though, that what Edgar Cayce said, that many people who lived in Atlantis were reincarnating now, and that these people were advanced technically, and that all this technical civilization was easy for them, and that the Atlanteans brought destruction on themselves by the misuse or the selfish misuse of their power, and that the same thing is possible today.
Tendencies in the heart and souls of men are such that these upheavals may be brought about. It is true that man brings order out of chaos by his compliance with divine law. By his disregard of it, man brings chaos and destructive forces into his experience.
Well, I don't think the future's fixed. I think that maybe we have a choice as individuals and probably as a nation.
I think that the question that was presented to Mr. Cayce more often than any other was, Mr. Cayce, you're so wonderful. How do you do all of this? And his answer always was, you can do this too. And he said, all of us have the same source. We all are an externalization of the God, the creative force, which makes it possible for all of us to do all of the things that any human being ever did in the earth, including our guide, Jesus the Christ. And so he said that within all of us there are also buried not only the talents, the experiences, the memories that we've had from the beginning of time, but that divine self, which is just waiting for us to be awakened. And he said that perhaps the last remaining door for all of us that remains available, even in our present state, is the dream state.
The dreams as we see that come to the entity are those correlations of the physical with the subconscious forces of the body. And from same, there may be gained those truths, those lessons, which, when used aright, may be for the development of the body spiritually, mentally, financially.
It is through the dream state, especially after meditation, that we open up the doors of all the levels of our own consciousness to all time and space. And so he said meditation was that which every single soul had to do. Prayer is talking to God, but meditation is listening so that the divine within may begin to speak to us personally.
One of Edgar Cayce's lifelong dreams was to build a hospital and to form an organization that would preserve and work with his psychic data. A reading was given and stated, as has been given, the better place to establish such an institute would be near large bodies of water, preferably on the East Coast, at or near Virginia Beach, Virginia. In the mid-20s, the Cayce family moved to Virginia Beach. The Association of National Investigators was formed in 1927, and it was that organization that built the hospital. His dream was short-lived, for the hospital was lost during the Depression. In 1931, the Association for Research and Enlightenment was formed. It undertook to cross-index and build experiments on the more than 14,000 readings that Cayce gave in his lifetime. The purpose of this ever-growing organization is perhaps best expressed in the words taken from a letter from Edgar Cayce to a friend. All men must find within self that which rings true for them. Neither I nor the association that carries on the work with the readings has anything to sell, nor has any instant answers. What we do have is a body of information. Of this information, I can only say that in my life and in the lives of many of those who've come in contact with the readings, there seems to be much that is of help. But if you would know, you must seek, for it is a personal experience. You must judge for yourself. Facts and results are the only measuring rods. If this knowledge is to be of any lasting benefit to mankind, it will require open-minded, intelligent research by men and women in all walks of life, engaged in a cooperative effort. Those who carry on with the work share the ideals set by Edgar Cayce, which appears over the entrance of the library, that we may make manifest the love of God and man.
You know, the important thing about the depth of this man, Edgar Cayce, was that as I read my life reading every year, I find new things in there that I didn't see before.
I think the greatest thing that has happened to me is the knowledge I've gained of the Bible and the true meaning of the Bible according to the Edgar Cayce readings.
I've heard his mother say that Edgar never took any credit for this. He always felt that God gave him this gift to heal people.
It's remarkable. I mean, you know, you'd like to live 1,000 years so you could keep working with the Cayce readings.
No way you can even score when someone is willing to lay down their life